Very good morning and welcome to MansfieldToday.com. Welcome to Monday. Now, as you may or may not have noticed, I am not Jeremy Mansfield. I'm not even doing a good impersonation. I am, though, Chris Gibbons, Mansfield Today's business correspondent, and I'm greeting you like this because Jeremy, unfortunately, has fallen ill, so I am filling in for him. Now, if you're a regular subscriber to Mansfield Today, and I hope you are, you might have noticed that when I'm away, a chap called Chris Buchanan steps in to fill the gap for me. So, yes, we're all filling in for each other this morning. Chris Buchanan, a very good morning to you and welcome. Thank you for stepping in at short notice. Right off the bat, Chris, the markets are heading south.
Hello, Chris. Sadly, yes, you're right. With the US leading the way and the rest of us following suit. Wall Street, its worst week since January last week. The S&P down 2.9%. Its ninth week of losses out of 10. The Nasdaq was down 0.6%. The Dow down 2.6%. As ever, the coattails of the big players. JSE All Share was down 1.6%. Top 40 down 1.7%. And I think we can expect some more losses both here and in developed economies as this week unfolds.
All right, Chris, what is actually driving all of this? Is it, I assume, the war in Ukraine?
It's definitely part of the problem, Chris, but the real cause for fear and alarm is inflation, particularly in the US. On Friday, we had the latest number, inflation at 8.6% in May, its highest level in 40 years. And what that means is that pressure is mounting on US Fed and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to bring it under control. In turn, that means higher interest rate hikes and quicker. The expectation now for at least 4 more hikes this year, each 1.5 percentage point. Cause of the inflation, well, the war in Ukraine, certainly a part, squeezing oil prices to painfully high levels. Brent crude oil now above $122 a barrel. That filters through to all manner of things like transport costs, but the fundamental problem is the massive $1.9 trillion stimulus package pushed through by President Biden as he came into office in January last year. We can see now that the pandemic was already receding at that point, rendering it way too much money into an economy that was already starting to pump. Adding to the mix, the fact that Secretary Yellen, by her own admission, didn't think inflation would be as sticky as it turned out to be. And you have a situation that's going to be very tricky to bring under control.
Isn't it just? Now, Chris, what does this mean for the rest of us, for example, down here on the southern tip of Africa?
Well, we're already fretting about our own inflation, Chris, which is just beneath the Reserve Bank ceiling of 6%. But once the big players start hiking interest rates, we're left with almost no choice but to follow. Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago has already said as much. I think we could see our own interest rates rise at least 1.5%, possibly more by year end. That just heaps pressure on already embattled consumers struggling with petrol at record highs, along with increasing food prices.
Okay, talking about mounting pressure, President Ramaphosa certainly feeling the heat as a result of what people are calling Couchgate, the theft of money from his Limpopo game farm, as much as $4 million, according to ex-spy boss Arthur Fraser.
Chris, it's a bizarre story, but one that has deep implications for the country as a whole, especially from a business perspective. Let's not go into the politics of the thing, but would you do business with a country whose president stuffs money down the back of a couch? I'm afraid it plays straight into the narrative of a corrupt Africa. And doubly so, since Ramaphosa has suspended the public protector less than 24 hours after she announced a probe into the affair. She, Busisewe Mkhwebane, is of course massively conflicted. She knows Ramaphosa wants her out and is fighting tooth and nail to keep her job. But even so, it is a business story. It's one that matters for investors. It's about the acumen, the judgment, and the future of the president himself. I have to wonder if, like one of his celebrated cows, he is not being mortally wounded with a pack of hungry lions, hyenas, and vultures all circling its carcass. The problem, of course, and this really is from a business point of view, if Ramaphosa fails, who or what replaces him? It's that kind of question worrying investors in New York, London, and elsewhere. South Africa without Ramaphosa? Are we back to the Zuma years? And if Ramaphosa fails, we may look back at the rand at its current levels with something approaching fondness.
All right, Chris, on the subject of the rand, why has it been so strong of late, up until Friday of last week?
Well, Friday, it dropped over 2.5% as the dollar shot up to 105 to the euro on the back of those inflation numbers. Right now, the rand has little to do with the president and everything to do with Mrs. Watanabe. Mrs. Watanabe is the catch-all name for the Japanese retail investors who see a weak yen and low interest rates in Japan and look for higher returns elsewhere. South Africa's rand enters the frame, as do currencies like the Brazilian real. This is the so-called carry trade. Mrs. Watanabe was very prominent prior to the great crash of 2008, and it seems she's back in business. The Japanese yen, by the way, at a 20-year low against the dollar.
It's certainly not helping matters either. Mining output has crashed.
Mining output fallen nearly 15% in April, a contraction 3 times worse than forecast, Chris. The drop of 4.3% month on month in April compares with growth of 3.2% in March. Output in the sector now 7% lower than at the start of this year. The core problems: load shedding, floods in KZN, and Transnet's dysfunctional rail network. It's the industry's worst month since the start of the pandemic. Worth noting that earlier this week, ratings agency Moody's placed most of Transnet's credit ratings on a review for a downgrade. Moody's says it has become increasingly concerned about how Transnet will manage billions due in bond repayments over the coming months.
And of course, let's not forget, South Africa's oldest, most successful airline, Comair, has finally been liquidated.
Well, it operated the British Airways franchise here along with low-cost carrier Kulula.com. It's been in business rescue for the last 2 years. Earlier this year, it indicated it would need further funding to emerge from business rescue, and the week before last, grounded its planes short of cash. A statement from the business rescue practitioners issued yesterday morning says they attempted to find further funding but were not successful. Therefore, they had to apply for liquidation. The decision removes 40% of capacity from South African skies.
So, Chris, what actually happened there? I mean, if Comair was so successful, as everyone says, why the crash? And what are the implications going forward?
Chris, put simply, it flew into a perfect storm. It was owed 790 million rand by SAA in ticket sales. That didn't happen. It had ordered new Boeing 737 MAX planes when they were grounded. The pandemic put the brakes on all forms of travel for a long period of time, lost revenue there. And then came the massive jump in the price of oil. Adding to the problems, according to MoneyWeb, once it was in business rescue, the plan drawn up by the business rescue practitioners wasn't worth the paper it was written on, full of all sorts of very, very unlikely assumptions. Goodbye British Airways, goodbye Kulula.com.
And the implications?
Well, they're ugly.
The implications,
Comair accounted for about 40% of airline capacity. It's 40% of capacity that's gone, which leaves a couple of thousand of people looking for work, but also more than a couple of thousand tourists who can now not get connecting flights around the country. The people we obviously feel sorry for. The rest of the airline industry will expand to fill the gap in capacity, so many of them will be quickly re-employed. But tourists, well, that's just another blow to a sector that's already on its knees.
All right, bring it back to the war in Ukraine for a moment, Chris. We're starting to see some very ugly numbers coming through about the cost of this entirely dreadful business.
Indeed, Chris, the OECD just put out a paper that reveals the very heavy cost of war in Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine immediately slowed the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and set the global economy on a course of lower growth and rising inflation. The OECD's latest economic outlook projects global growth to decelerate sharply to around 3% this year and 2.8% in 2023, well below the recovery projected in the previous economic outlook last December. The economic and social impact of the war is strongest in Europe, with many of the countries hardest hit given exposure through energy imports and refugee inflows. High inflation is eroding household incomes and spending, hitting vulnerable households particularly hard. The risk of a serious food crisis remains acute for the world's poorest economies because of the high risk of supply shortages and elevated cost. Talking specifically about South Africa, it's projecting growth this year of no more than 1.8% and a very meager 1.3% next year. A lot of that is of our own making, think state capture, Eskom, Transnet, and so on. But the dictator in the Kremlin isn't helping either, which, of course, the ANC government has been very keen to forget.
Isn't that the truth? All right, finally, Chris, the European Union has taken a big decision last week on universal charging. Universal charging. What's that all about?
I'll explain it in a moment, but could you pass me your phone charger? What is it, by the way? Samsung? Apple?
As it happens, it's an Apple.
Well, sorry, that's no use, Chris. Mine's a Samsung, and that's the point. Chances are that whatever you've got, I've got the opposite. And if I wanted to charge this watch here, that's something different again, and so on. Well, the EU has decided to force the manufacturers to comply with a single universal charging standard. So from 2024, if I ask to borrow your charger again, chances are that you'll be able to help. It's not just about being able to help each other, of course. It's apparently about saving consumers money. We spend ludicrous amounts on this kit anyway, and why shouldn't we standardize? Apple is set to be the big loser here. It has always had its own proprietary standard for connections. Now it will have to conform with everybody else. But let's not get too excited. Plans for a common European charger have been around since before the iPhone. We have to ask, are the Europeans, and by implications the rest of us, actually going to benefit from this new rule? One argument in favor is that it will stop us binning as much as 1,000 tons of electronics per year. But as this week's Economist points out, that's just 0.002% of the global total. What about the carbon footprint of chargers then? Well, again, according to The Economist, the saving will amount to about 900,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Sounds impressive? Well, that's less than the amount given off by a single Boeing jet. The Economist's conclusion, this is nothing more than European bureaucrats trying to prove to the broader public that they can actually achieve something, anything, and it also looks very much like politicians trying to tell business what's good for it, especially French politicians trying to tell American businesses that they know best. On that note, Chris, I'll leave you to make up your own mind.
Definitely something to think about. France against the United States in the business sphere, definitely. And this, of course, in a week when the US Fed meets and will almost certainly raise interest rates. That's it from MansfieldToday.com. I'm Chris Gibbons, filling in for Jeremy Mansfield. I've been talking this morning with business journalist Chris Buchanan. Chris, thank you for joining us. Have yourselves a very good week. We'll be back again next Monday. Thank you for watching.